This nearly 5-foot tower consists of every single book that I read last year. Now, I started off with the goal to read 43 books, which is one more book than the most that I've ever read within a year. But a few weeks into January, with that motivation still going strong, I thought, you know what? Let's go for it. Let's read 52 books, an average of one book a week for the entire year, and I did it. In fact, I actually read 53 books. I'm incredibly proud of this accomplishment, and it changed my life in ways that I just didn't even expect. In this video, I'm going to detail the benefits of reading a book a week, along with the challenges I faced doing it, things I would do differently, and I'm going to share my favorite books that I read last year. First off, I've always wanted to read 52 books a year, but for the longest time, that number looms so large and it just seemed so unachievable with the way how I lived my life. You see, even though I absolutely love reading, there's a certain point where the knowledge gleaned from books can't compete with real-world experience. I just want to make sure that I'm not completely living my life vicariously through books. So for me, finding a good balance between reading and living was very important to me. It was probably the main challenge I faced while going about this goal. For example, last year I took a 2-week trip to the Netherlands and I read exactly one book. It was The Sundown Motel, and it isn't very long. It's like a bit over 300 pages and it moves fairly quickly. Now, if I was back home and it was a regular work week, I'd be able to crush this book pretty quickly. Maybe it would take just a week to read. And on a side note, this book was not bad, but not great. It was okay. Now, being in the Netherlands, being in Amsterdam, there was no need to live vicariously through a book because my life was incredibly exciting at that point. In the acquisition of knowledge, I was getting that from going to these museums, these famous sites. I was obtaining it from going out into the world. Of course, I still read on my trip. There was always downtime, like traveling on a train or sipping my morning coffee. It's just the thing is, I never wanted my reading to intrude on valuable life experiences. That was the big challenge of reading 52 books, finding that perfect balance between reading and living. So one of the ways I dealt with this was to be very strategic about my reading and to chart my progress. As a result, I made a Word document where I listed and numbered every single book that I would read over the course of the year. Plus, I wrote down my thoughts on the book as well as typed up particular quotes and passages that I enjoyed. This really helped keep me accountable, so I would always know how many books I've read and how many books I need to read to keep pace with my 52 book goal. I'm a big proponent of the adage, what gets measured gets managed. To me, having that list was absolutely essential to keep up with my reading. For pretty much the entire year, I was nearly on pace with averaging a book a week, but when November came around, I was maybe about 3 to 4 books behind. But I was prepared for that. I knew in those final weeks I could buckle down and make a strong push for the finish. At that point, I had to be even more selective with what I read. I tried to find books that didn't exceed 300 pages and try to get a good variety of subjects. I knew variety would be even more important during those final weeks because I'd be spending a lot more time reading, and I felt if I kept it fresh, I'd have more motivation. Now, during those last 2 months, I spent more time reading than I would have preferred. Even though I enjoyed it, there were other things I would like to have done. But it was so worth it. And it wasn't like there was a dramatic amount of catch-up I needed to do. I did enough work in the beginning of the year so that final reading sprint was very manageable. And that brings me to one of the unexpected benefits of reading 52 books a year, and I didn't realize this until the very end. The thing is, it's not an endeavor that you can put off until the last months of the year. Unless you have a lot of free time or are a very fast reader, you always have to be reading. And I thought to myself, when I finished my 52nd book, A Clockwork Orange, that if I could set this big goal and accomplish it, what else can I achieve when I put the same amount of time and effort into another endeavor? I mean, I was immensely proud of myself that I set a goal, stuck with it for an entire year, and achieved it. The confidence and pride I got from accomplishing this endeavor was simply a benefit that I just never expected. That's one thing I've really come to realize in life, that success is not usually just one big action, but a number of small but consistent steps. Like chopping down a tree with an axe. It wasn't the final swing that brought down the tree, but the combination of every chop before it. And speaking of trees, this goal would have been a hell of a lot easier if I had either a Kindle or an e-reader of some sort. Space in New York City comes at a premium, and 52 books take up a lot of space. Plus, like, bringing along a big, bulky hardcover book is not always the easiest. And the fact that with a Kindle on how you can really focus in onto a single page, whereas some of these hard copy books have such intimidating pages with really tiny type. More often than not, when I see pages like that, I could be more inclined to just pull out my phone and hop on Instagram. One of the other challenges from undertaking this endeavor was that I was kind of limited from reading certain books, particularly the big ones. For instance, I got this big book by Murakami for Christmas in 2021. It's 3 volumes and totals almost 1,000 pages. It would have been very difficult to read last year. Although I did read some large books, but none of them are quite on the same level as this one here. That's also one reason why I won't read 52 books a year again in the future. I just don't like being limited with what I can read. And once again, that balance between living and living vicariously through books, I feel, can be hindered by aiming to read a certain number of books. It can cause one to object valuable opportunities to learn and live. Plus, I always feel that if one is gaining so much knowledge from books, that it's not really fair to keep it all to oneself. It's important to take what one learned and put it out into the world so it can benefit others. But at the end of the day, I am so happy that I did this at least once in my life. It's simply so cool to look at this tower of books that I read last year and to think of all the knowledge and information that is contained within them, that took the authors thousands of hours to accumulate, is now a part of me. This stack is the trophy of knowledge that I earned last year. This also might be a unique benefit of reading physical books as opposed to ebooks, because seeing them stacked up like this is just simply so damn cool. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, when I was constructing this tower, I got a few self-esteem points, because this is just such a neat visual representation of what I accomplished. And on a side note, I'm actually kind of shocked that I was able to construct this tower without it even falling down once. It turned out to be bigger than I expected. All in all, I think reading 52 books in a year is a great goal to have, but even more important, just being a consistent reader is what really matters. If someone goes from reading 2 to 3 books a year to 10, that's a big jump, and one should be really proud of that. At the end of the day, our biggest competition is ourselves, and to increase the amount of knowledge that we personally take in is what counts. And the thing is, it's not like school. One actually gets to select the books that they want to read. You know the saying, you are what you eat, the same applies to books, you are what you read. So for me, it's very obvious that food and dining is a very large part of my life. I want to become a better food critic and increase my knowledge of culinary history. As a result, I read a lot of food and chef-focused works. And I took an absolute ton from those books, and I'm better for it. But even though I probably read those books the most over the last year, I just can't stress how important variety is, at least for me. And it's not just to keep the act of reading fresh. Books give one the opportunity to be a truly well-rounded person. Although not every book has to be a pillar of knowledge, some books can simply be fun, act as palate cleansers from the more serious and strenuous works. Take for instance when I read The Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham. This was hands down one of the hardest books I've ever read. It's very big, there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of charts, and it can be kind of confusing at points. By the time I finished it, I needed something different. I wanted explosions, action, adventure, car chases. My brain needed a break. So that's where stories like John Gardner's James Bond books come in. These are the type of books that if you've read one, you've kind of read them all. But that's okay. Books don't always have to be serious. And even though, how I said earlier, I never want to live my life vicariously, completely through books, it's fine to read something like this every once in a while, because let's face it, life sucks sometimes, and this provides a nice mental escape. This can be good for one's mental health. I can go on and on about all the benefits books can provide and all the benefits they've provided me. And even if one lives their life vicariously completely through books, that's fine. I mean, there are much, much worse things one can do. Reading is a phenomenal hobby. And to conclude, I'd like to share some of my favorite books that I've read this year. And if any of these books I mentioned do interest you, I've provided a list of Amazon affiliate links below in the description. And the benefit of using those links is that I get a little kickback at no expense to you, which means I could use that money, spend it on more books and food. And just for future reference, if I ever mention a book or a product, I'll always do my best to provide a link in the description so one can easily check that out. When it comes to the best fiction books I read last year, my hands down favorite was A Gentleman in Moscow by Amor Towles. It's kind of historical fiction. It's about a gentleman under house arrest living in a luxurious Moscow hotel. I just loved the details, the characters, the descriptions. This book is so richly vivid. It was a pleasure to read from the start to its finish. And because I enjoyed A Gentleman in Moscow so much, I was inspired to read one of Amor Towles' other books, Rules of Civility. This was also very good, but I do think A Gentleman in Moscow is far superior. Still, I had a great time reading this book. It's set in post-Depression era 1930s New York. The descriptions are once again beautiful, and it's such a romantic time period of New York. Being a New Yorker, I love this book. And one of the other books I particularly enjoyed this year was a nonfiction one, Midnight in the Garden of Good and Evil. It's about a guy's experience living in Savannah, Georgia, but the whole story kind of revolves around this infamous murder. You see, my aunt got me this book right after I took a trip to Savannah, Georgia, and I absolutely love this city. It's such a unique and beautiful place with so much history, and that's what this book really captures. Probably one of my least favorite genres of books are self-help books. But I'm always willing to give something a chance if a lot of people think it's good, and that's kind of the case with Atomic Habits by James Clear, and it turned out to be a very good book. To be honest, most of the strategies mentioned in this book I was already aware of, but Clear articulates them in such a fantastic fashion. Plus, I always think it's beneficial to be reminded of some of these things I should be doing to developing habits, and Clear really makes this plain in a very approachable format. If one pays attention and follows the advice listed in here, it can really change a person's life. Even though there are definitely more books I could mention that I really enjoyed this year, I'm only going to talk about one more, and this is The Last Castle. This book is a history book. It's about the history of America's largest home, the Biltmore Estate, and the Vanderbilts, one of America's most illustrious families. I really love historical architecture, and Biltmore House is the product of two very important architects, Richard Morris Hunt and Frederick Law Olmsted. Olmsted is of course responsible for Central Park here in New York City. And intertwined among the construction and history of the Biltmore House is the history of the Vanderbilt family, and it is kind of tragic, but all in all, this is just a very well-written and well-researched story. So that's it. Reading 52 books a year has really benefited and changed my life for the better. There's simply so much to say about the benefits of reading. To me, books are experiences, and this year I enjoyed 53 amazing experiences, and I'm better for it. In conclusion, read some damn books.